My name is Samantha, and my neighbor knew things about me that I'd never told anyone. Not my friends, not my family, not even my therapist. This happened 9 months ago in an apartment building in Denver. I lived on the 3rd floor, and my neighbor, a woman named Diane, lived directly across the hall. Diane was in her late 40s and worked as some kind of data analyst. She was quiet, polite, and we'd exchange pleasantries in the hallway. She lived there for years before I moved in. I thought she was nice but kept to herself. I had no reason to think anything strange about her until one evening when everything changed. I'd had a really bad day at work and came home upset. I was crying in the hallway trying to get my keys out when Diane opened her door. She asked if I was okay. I said I was fine, just a rough day. She invited me in for tea. I hesitated, but she seemed genuinely concerned, so I accepted. Her apartment was cozy and filled with books and plants. We sat in her living room and she made chamomile tea. We talked for maybe 20 minutes about general things: work stress, the weather, our building's terrible heating. Then she said something that stopped me cold. She said, "It must be especially hard given what happened with your sister." I stared at her. I'd never mentioned my sister to her. My sister had died in a car accident 3 years ago, and it was something I rarely talked about with anyone. I asked her how she knew about that. She smiled gently and said she must have overheard me on the phone sometime. I didn't remember ever talking about my sister on the phone in the hallway, but I let it go. A week later, I ran into her at our building's mailboxes. She asked how my doctor's appointment went. I froze. I'd had an appointment that morning, but I'd never mentioned it to anyone in the building. I asked her how she knew. She said she'd seen me leaving early with a medical folder. That seemed plausible, so I didn't push it, but it felt wrong. After that, I started noticing things. She'd make small comments that showed she knew details about my life that I'd never shared. She mentioned my mother's name correctly without me ever telling her. She asked about a job interview I'd had, even though I'd only told 2 close friends about it. She commented on a prescription I'd picked up from the pharmacy. Each time, she had a reasonable explanation. She'd overheard something, seen something, made an educated guess. But the frequency was unsettling. One night, I was on the phone with my best friend Ashley talking about a guy I'd been seeing casually. I was in my bedroom with the door closed, speaking quietly. The next day, Diane asked me in the hallway how things were going with that guy from the coffee shop. That was exactly where I'd met him, but I'd never mentioned him to her, and I was certain she couldn't have heard me through the walls. I confronted her directly this time. I asked her how she knew about him. She laughed it off and said I must have mentioned him before and forgotten. I insisted I hadn't. She just smiled and changed the subject. I started to feel paranoid. Was she listening through the walls? Did she have cameras somehow? I checked my apartment for hidden devices but found nothing. I started being more careful about what I said, even when I was alone. Then one day, I received a package that wasn't mine. It was addressed to Diane but delivered to my door by mistake. It was a large padded envelope. I was going to just take it across the hall, but curiosity got the better of me. The envelope wasn't sealed properly and the flap was partially open. I looked inside. There were papers, printed documents. I pulled them out and my hands started shaking. They were about me, detailed reports. There were screenshots of my social media posts, including posts from accounts I thought were private. There were copies of my credit card statements. Somehow she'd gotten my transactions for the past 6 months. There were medical records from my doctor's office. There were text message logs between me and my friends. There were emails I'd sent and received. There was a document titled Behavioral Patterns that tracked what time I left for work, what time I came home, what I did on weekends, who I spent time with. I felt like I was going to throw up. I took photos of everything with my phone, put the documents back in the envelope, and took it straight to the police. I filed a report and showed them the evidence. They contacted Diane. She claimed she'd been conducting research for a novel she was writing and had gotten carried away. She said she'd compiled public information and made some assumptions, but denied hacking my accounts or accessing my medical records. She said the package was just drafts for her book, and I'd invaded her privacy by looking inside. The police investigated but said most of the information, while creepy, came from sources that were technically accessible public social media posts, information that could be gathered through various legal means. The medical records were concerning, but without proof of how she obtained them, it was hard to prosecute. They warned her to stop and told me to document everything. I also got a restraining order that required her to stay at least 50 feet away from me. Diane moved out 2 weeks later. She left without saying a word. But before she left, I found a note slipped under my door. It said, "You have no idea how much you share without realizing it. Everyone does. I was just paying attention." I kept that note and gave it to the police, but she was already gone. I moved out of that building 3 months later. I deleted all my social media accounts. I got a new phone number, new email addresses, new everything. I check my credit report monthly now. I put alerts on all my accounts. What terrifies me most is that she was right. I've been sharing so much information without realizing it through social media, through apps that tracked my location, through loyalty cards and online shopping, through unencrypted emails and weak passwords. She'd just been organized enough to piece it all together. I think about how many other people could be doing the same thing to others right now, and no one would ever know. My name is Brian, and the neighbor who helped us search for our missing dog was the same person who killed her. This happened 2 years ago in a quiet residential neighborhood in Sacramento. I lived there with my wife Kelly and our golden retriever Sadie. The neighborhood was perfect tree-lined streets, families with kids, and everyone knew everyone. Our neighbor Carl lived 3 houses down. He was in his 60s, retired from teaching, and was always friendly. He'd stop to chat when he saw us walking Sadie. He'd give her treats and call her a good girl. He seemed like a genuinely kind man who loved animals. That's what made everything so horrifying when the truth came out. It started with small things we didn't connect at first. A neighbor's cat died suddenly. The vet said it seemed like kidney failure. A week later, another neighbor's dog got extremely sick and had to be rushed to the emergency vet. They saved him, but barely. The vet said it looked like poisoning but couldn't determine what kind. Then another cat died. Then a small dog, all within 2 months, all on our street, all with similar symptoms: vomiting, seizures, organ failure. People started getting worried. We all thought maybe there was contaminated water or some environmental toxin. A few neighbors even had their soil tested. Nothing came back abnormal. Then Sadie started acting strange. She wouldn't eat her dinner one night, which was completely unlike her. By morning, she was vomiting. We rushed her to the vet. They ran tests and said she'd ingested some kind of toxin, likely antifreeze mixed with something else. They tried everything, but her organs were failing. We had to put her down that same day. I was devastated. Kelly couldn't stop crying. Carl came over that evening with flowers and a card. He sat with us and cried too. He talked about how much he'd loved Sadie and how unfair it was. He offered to help us figure out what happened. He suggested we organize a neighborhood meeting to discuss the pet deaths and find the source of the poisoning. We thought he was being incredibly supportive. At the meeting, Carl took charge. He made a list of all the pets that had died or gotten sick. He created a map showing which houses were affected. He suggested we set up a neighborhood watch to look for anyone suspicious. He volunteered to research common poisons and how they might be spreading. Everyone thought he was amazing, so proactive and caring. Some people even said we were lucky to have someone like him in the neighborhood. Over the next few weeks, 3 more pets died. The police got involved finally. They started investigating it as a potential poisoning case. They went door to door interviewing neighbors, collecting information, asking if anyone had seen anything suspicious. Carl was extremely helpful to them. He gave them his map and his research. He told them about his theories on how the poison might be spreading. The police seemed to appreciate his input. Then one day, a neighbor 4 houses down from Carl installed security cameras around his property because he was worried about his 2 dogs. The cameras had a wide angle and captured part of the sidewalk and the street. 2 nights after installation, His younger dog started showing symptoms of poisoning. They rushed her to the vet and saved her, but it was close. The neighbor immediately checked his camera footage. He saw Carl. At 3 a.m., Carl had walked up to his yard, opened the side gate, and tossed something into the dog's water bowl. The footage was clear enough to show Carl's face and his actions. The neighbor called the police immediately. They obtained the footage and went to Carl's house with a warrant. What they found was worse than anyone imagined. Carl had an entire shelf in his garage dedicated to killing pets, different types of poison carefully labeled, logs documenting which pets he'd targeted, what he'd used, and the results, photos of the pets, some alive, some dead. He'd been doing this for over a year, long before Sadie died. He'd killed at least 17 pets total. The police found notes where he'd written about his methods, his favorite poisons, and which combinations worked fastest. When they arrested him, he confessed everything. He said he didn't like animals and never had. He said pets were loud and messy and ruined neighborhoods. He said he'd been pretending to like them his whole life, but he actually hated them. He'd retired and had more free time, so he decided to clean up the neighborhood. He said helping us search for answers and organizing the neighborhood meeting was the most fun he'd had in years because he got to watch everyone suffer while pretending to care. The worst part was learning that he'd specifically targeted Sadie because we'd asked him to watch her while we were out of town a few months earlier. He said she'd barked at a squirrel and annoyed him, so he decided she'd be next. He'd been planning it for weeks. He'd even practiced the dosage on other dogs to make sure it would work quickly. He wanted us to suffer like the other families had. Carl was charged with multiple counts of animal cruelty. He pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 3 years in prison, which felt like nothing compared to what he'd done. Several neighbors, including us, filed civil suits against him. We won, but no amount of money brought Sadie back. The neighborhood was never the same after that. People stopped trusting each other. Several families moved away. We stayed for another year, but eventually we moved too. Every time I saw Carl's house, I felt sick. We have a new dog now, a rescue named Murphy. We live in a different city where we don't know our neighbors well, and honestly, I prefer it that way. Kelly still has nightmares sometimes about Carl sitting in our living room crying over Sadie when he was the one who killed her. I think about all the times he gave her treats and petted her, knowing what he was planning to do. The cruelty of it still makes me angry. The fact that he seemed so normal, so kind, so helpful, that's what haunts me most. You truly never know who people really are. My name is Rachel, and what I found in my neighbor's garbage nearly destroyed my marriage. I'm still trying to process it 6 months later. We moved into our townhouse in Portland last spring, excited about the extra space and the friendly-looking neighborhood. It seemed perfect for starting a family. What we didn't know was that our next-door neighbor had been documenting our lives in ways we never could have imagined. The townhouses shared walls, so we could hear basic things: footsteps, running water, the occasional TV. Our neighbor, Mrs. Chen, seemed normal enough. She was in her 60s, always smiled when we saw her, and kept mostly to herself. She told us she was a retired photographer when we first met. That detail would haunt me later. The first strange thing I noticed was about 3 weeks after we moved in. I was taking out the recycling when I saw a photo sticking out of Mrs. Chen's trash bin. I wouldn't have thought twice about it, except I recognized the image. It was me. Specifically, it was me getting out of my car in our driveway. I pulled it out and stared at it. The angle was from her upstairs window. It was printed on glossy photo paper, high quality, like something you frame. My husband David was at work, so I texted him a picture of it. He called me immediately and told me to grab it and bring it inside. When he got home, we examined it together. It was definitely me, definitely taken from her window, definitely intentional. We debated whether to confront her or just let it go. Maybe she was practicing photography and accidentally left it in the trash. We decided to wait and see. A week later, I found another photo in her trash. This time it was David mowing the lawn. Again, high quality, taken from her window. I started checking her trash every week after that. I know it sounds paranoid, but I needed to know. Over the next month, I found dozens of photos. Me watering plants, David washing his car, both of us leaving for work, us coming home with groceries. There were photos of us through our windows eating dinner, watching TV, talking in the kitchen. Some were taken at night, through gaps in our curtains. I started keeping them in a folder hidden in my closet. I didn't tell David about all of them because I didn't want to scare him, but I was terrified. Why was she taking these? Why was she printing them? And most disturbing, why was she throwing them away? One night I found something that made my blood run cold. It was a photo of me sleeping. The angle was from inside our bedroom. I woke David up immediately and showed him. He went pale. There was no way she could have taken that from her window. Someone had been inside our house. We called the police that night. 2 officers came and took our statements. We showed them all the photos I'd collected. They went next door to talk to Mrs. Chen. She let them inside and cooperated fully. She admitted to taking photos of us from her windows but denied ever entering our home. She said she was lonely and liked watching the young couple next door. The officers said it was creepy but technically not illegal since we were visible from public areas or her property. As for the bedroom photo, without proof of forced entry, there wasn't much they could do. They told us to get better locks and maybe install cameras. The next day, David installed cameras outside our doors and windows. We also changed all our locks and made sure our windows were always locked. For a few days, nothing happened. Mrs. Chen stayed inside. We didn't see her at all. Then one evening, I was going through the photos again, looking for any detail I might have missed. That's when I noticed something in the background of one photo. It was taken of me in the kitchen, but reflected in the microwave door behind me was a figure. Someone standing in our hallway. The photo was taken during the day when David was at work and I was home alone. I zoomed in as much as I could on my phone. The figure was blurry, but it was definitely a person, and it was Mrs. Chen. It was a man, a younger man, maybe in his 30s. I showed David. He looked like he might be sick. We went back through every photo, examining the backgrounds. In 3 other photos, we found the same figure always in our house, always in the background, always blurry but visible. David wanted to call the police again immediately, but I stopped him. I had an idea. The next morning, while David was at work, I went next door and knocked. Mrs. Chen answered with her usual smile. I asked if I could come in and talk to her. She let me in. Her house was filled with photographs framed on every wall, stacked on tables, covering every surface. Most were landscapes and street scenes, but I noticed a few of David and me mixed in. I told her I knew she'd been taking pictures of us and that I'd found them in her trash. I stayed calm. I asked her directly if someone else had been in our house. She hesitated. Then she started crying. She told me her son lived with her. He was in his mid-30s and had severe mental health issues. He'd been obsessed with us since we moved in. She'd been trying to manage his behavior, but he would sneak out at night and she couldn't stop him. She said he'd made copies of our house keys weeks ago when we'd left them on our porch table one afternoon while unloading the car. She'd taken the photos to try to monitor what he was doing, to see if he was getting worse. She was throwing them away because she couldn't stand looking at them. She swore he'd never touched us or hurt anything. He just liked to watch us sleep. I left her house and went straight back to ours. I called David and told him everything. We called the police again. This time they took it seriously. They arrested her son that evening. They found more photos in his bedroom, hundreds of them, all of me and David. Some were taken from inside our house at night. He'd been coming in 2 or 3 times a week for over a month. We got a restraining order. Mrs. Chen moved out 2 weeks later, taking her son with her. We sold the townhouse 3 months after that. We couldn't stay there. Every night I'd wake up wondering if someone was standing in our hallway watching us sleep. We couldn't afford to move at first, but we made it work. We're in an apartment now, 4th floor, with a doorman. I still check the locks 3 times before bed. My name is Marcus, and I discovered my neighbor had been collecting my family's DNA for reasons that still make me feel violated. This happened last year in a suburb outside of Phoenix. We, lived in our house for about 8 months when things started getting strange. Our neighbor Greg lived alone in the house directly behind ours. Our backyards faced each other with just a low fence between them. He was in his early 50s, worked from home doing something with computers and seemed friendly enough. He'd wave when he saw us outside. My wife Jennifer and our 2 kids, Emma and Lucas, ages 7 and 9, thought he was nice. The first weird thing happened when Jennifer noticed our trash cans had been moved. We kept them on the side of the house, and one morning she saw they'd been pulled out slightly and the lids were off. She thought maybe an animal got into them, but when she checked, nothing was torn up or scattered. It happened again the next week. Then again. I started to wonder if someone was going through our trash, so I set up a cheap motion camera pointing at the cans. 2 nights later, the camera caught Greg. He came into our yard around 2 a.m., opened our trash cans and took things out. He put on latex gloves first. He was selecting specific items, used tissues, dental floss, hair from our brushes, cotton swabs, even my kids used bandages. He'd put each item in a separate Ziploc bag, label it with a marker, then put everything back and leave. I watched the footage 3 times, not believing what I was seeing. I showed Jennifer. She was horrified. We didn't know what to do. Was this illegal? It felt illegal. I decided to confront him first before calling the police. The next morning, I went over and knocked on his door. He answered cheerfully like nothing was wrong. I told him I had cameras and knew what he was doing. His whole demeanor changed instantly. The smile disappeared. He didn't deny it. Instead, he asked me to come inside so we could talk privately. Against my better judgment, I went in. His house was immaculate and organized, everything labeled, everything in its place. He sat me down at his kitchen table and told me he collected DNA samples from everyone in the neighborhood. He said it started as a hobby, a way to learn genetics, but it became something more. He pulled out a binder and showed me. Inside were pages and pages of documentation. Each neighbor had a section with their names, photos, and dates. Under each name were lists of DNA samples he'd collected: hair, saliva, blood when he could get it. He had samples from at least 20 families. He had samples from my entire family going back months, from before I even knew he existed. I asked him what he was doing with the samples. He told me he was sending them to online DNA testing services. He'd created fake accounts using different names and addresses, then submit our DNA to see what he could learn. He showed me printouts of genetic reports for me, my wife, and both my kids. He knew our ethnic backgrounds, health predispositions, distant relatives, everything. He had a file on my family that was thicker than any medical record I'd ever seen. He knew my daughter had a genetic marker for a heart condition that we didn't even know about yet. I asked him why. He said he liked knowing things about people that they didn't know about themselves. He said it made him feel powerful. He said he'd never do anything bad with the information, he just liked having it. I told him I was calling the police. He didn't try to stop me. He just sat there calmly and said they probably wouldn't do anything since DNA in trash is considered abandoned property. I left and called the police immediately. 2 officers came to my house and I showed them the camera footage and told them everything Greg had told me. They went to his house. He let them in and showed them everything willingly, all the samples, all the binders, all the DNA reports. He cooperated completely. The officers came back and told me that Greg was right. Technically, he hadn't broken any laws. DNA in the trash is legally considered abandoned, and the DNA testing services he used were all legal consumer services. They said it was creepy and weird, but not criminal. I couldn't accept that. I contacted a lawyer. The lawyer said we might have a civil case for invasion of privacy, but it would be expensive and difficult to win. In the meantime, I told all our neighbors what was happening. I went door to door with printouts of the camera footage and showed everyone. The neighborhood was horrified. Several families confronted Greg. One neighbor's husband threatened him. The police had to come back to keep the peace. Within a week, Greg put his house up for sale. He barely left his house during that time. The neighbors started a petition to try to force him out faster, though I don't think it had any legal weight. He moved out within a month, leaving before the house even sold. We later found out from the real estate agent that he'd relocated to somewhere in Nevada. But here's what still terrifies me. Before he left, he knocked on my door one final time. He handed me a flash drive and said, "This is everything I have on your family. I'm deleting my copies." Then he said, "But you should know, I'm not the only one who does this. There are communities online. Some of them are doing much worse things with the information." Then he left. I gave the flash drive to the police, but they said there still wasn't a crime. I never opened it myself. I was too scared of what else might be on it. We've since moved to a different state. I put locks on our trash cans now. I burn anything with hair or bodily fluids. My wife thinks I'm paranoid, but she does the same thing. We had our kids DNA tested through our actual doctor just to make sure there weren't any health issues we needed to know about. The heart condition Greg found in my daughter's DNA was real. We're monitoring it now. I hate that he was right. I hate that he knew before we did. I hate that somewhere out there might be others doing the same thing. My name is Andrea, and I never saw the children next door step outside until the day one tried to escape. This happened 18 months ago in a quiet neighborhood outside Portland, Oregon. The family next door seemed normal enough. Parents Jim and Teresa, always in a hurry, waving politely but never stopping to chat. I'd hear children's voices through their windows laughing, talking, sometimes crying. But in all the weeks I watched, I never saw any children. Not once. I mentioned it to my neighbor Linda, who'd lived there 15 years. She said Jim and Teresa homeschooled their kids and kept them inside. Very protective, maybe overly so. I accepted that. But things felt wrong. The children's voices were constant, yet I never saw them. Not in the yard, not getting in the car, not even at windows. The curtain stayed drawn always. One afternoon, I heard a child screaming in distress for several minutes before it stopped abruptly. One evening, taking out trash, I heard a small voice whisper from their fence. "Hello?" A little girl named Emma, 8 years old. She said she wasn't supposed to talk to neighbors, but she was curious. She said her parents told her the outside world was dangerous and people would hurt her if she left the house. She'd never been to a store or park or anywhere except that house. 4 children total her: Michael, who was 12, Lily, who was 6, and David, who was 4. None had ever been to school or left the property. I asked if her parents hurt her. She hesitated. They didn't hit them, but there were rules. If they broke the rules, they went to the quiet room for hours, sometimes all day, dark and small. She hated it. Then I heard a door slam and she whispered, "I have to go." The next morning after Jim and Teresa left, I looked through a fence gap. 4 children in the backyard, but they looked wrong. Unnaturally pale, like they never saw sunlight. Too thin. Their clothes old and ill-fitting. They moved awkwardly, like they didn't know how to play. Michael watched the younger ones with an expression too serious for 12, exhausted and afraid. Emma saw me and ran over, whispering urgently, "You can't let them know you saw us. They have cameras everywhere. There'll be punishments." I called Child Protective Services immediately. 2 days later, a CPS worker visited. She was inside 45 minutes. When she came to my door afterward, she said the house was clean, children appeared healthy enough, and the parents claimed compromised immune systems required homeschooling. The children told her they were happy. Without evidence of abuse, nothing could be done. After that visit, complete silence. No children's voices, no one in the backyard, like they'd vanished. 3 weeks later at 2 a.m., tapping on my window woke me. Emma's face pressed against the glass, crying, "Please help us. They're going to hurt Michael." She climbed out her window and over the fence. Her feet were bleeding. She said Michael tried to escape that evening, broke a window. Their parents caught him and locked him in the basement. She heard him screaming, then silence. She was terrified they'd killed him. I called 911. Police arrived and demanded to see all the children. What they found was horrifying. 3 children locked in their bedrooms from the outside. Michael in the basement, unconscious, tied to a chair with bruises and burns. Locks on the outside of every bedroom door, bars on windows, surveillance in every room, a padlock on the refrigerator. The quiet room was a windowless closet barely big enough to sit in. Jim and Teresa were arrested, the children hospitalized. The investigation revealed years of isolation. The children had never seen a doctor, never been registered for school, never been outside except brief backyard visits, malnourished and developmentally delayed. Michael told investigators he remembered going outside when he was very young, but one day his parents said the world had become too dangerous. Over time, rules became stricter. Disobedience meant isolation, food deprivation, physical abuse. He'd tried escaping twice before. This time he broke the window out of desperation. The children went to foster care. Jim and Teresa were convicted of child abuse, false imprisonment, and endangerment, both sentenced to 25 years. Psychiatrists testified the parents had severe paranoid delusions, genuinely believing they were protecting their children from an apocalyptic world. I stayed in touch with Emma through the foster system. She said adjusting to the real world was the hardest thing she'd ever done. She'd never seen a grocery store, never been in a car, never met other children. Everything terrified her at first, but slowly, with therapy, she healed. Michael struggled most nightmares, trust issues, anger. The younger two adapted better. Emma said Michael told her the worst part wasn't the physical abuse, it was years of believing the world outside was deadly, believing their parents were protecting them, only to discover it was all lies and they'd been prisoners. I moved away 6 months later. I couldn't stay knowing what happened next door, knowing I'd heard those children but didn't act quickly enough. Emma is 14 now, in regular school, doing well. She still writes me. Her last letter said she's learning to ride a bike, something most kids learn at 5 or 6. She said every time she goes outside, she looks at the sky and reminds herself she's free, that the world isn't dangerous like her parents said. She wants to be a social worker when she grows up. I believe she will, and I hope she saves other children the way I wish I'd saved her sooner. The thing that haunts me is how normal Jim and Teresa seemed. How many other houses on quiet streets hide horrors behind closed curtains? How many other children are locked away, told the world is too dangerous, when the real danger is the people who claim to love them?